Okay, sorry about that, everybody. We are back with Professor Gradisar and Dr. Khan. Professor Gradisar, I'm not sure where we got cut off, but I asked the question that every parent wants to know is when they're going to get to sleep again.
Yes, it's the like you say, the age-old question, isn't it? Because the sleep has gone from being something quite nice, and then suddenly it's all broken up, and they're woken up by this tiny human being. There's probably two things to realise: is that at least we're built as humans to be able to not fight off sleep, so we're going to be able to sleep at some point. And as much as that's great, eventually we'll fall asleep. We do get woken up by these infants. But the second point to take home as well is that we do adapt to this sleep deprivation to some extent. So we're built to deal with sleep loss, surprisingly. Many of us have been there. Sometimes I remember walking home from the bus thinking, how am I putting one foot in front of the other right now? I'm so tired. The good news is, though, that, and we'll speak about this today, is that there's been many more scientific advances in the different range of things that parents can do so that they can try to help their baby sleep better and therefore they get better rest.
Okay.
So we'll talk about those later.
Okay, good. So we have a poll that we're going to be putting up shortly. That's going to be asking families if the COVID-19 pandemic has affected their baby sleep and how it has affected their sleep. And if we get time at the end, we'd love to see what those poll results are. So we would love everyone to take that poll if they can. So what I would love to think about during this time is, look, it's a very challenging time, as I said earlier, and we're all in this boat together. But I want to think about how we can focus on the opportunities of this time, as well as thinking about how we can look after our families, during this difficult time as well. Because whilst it is difficult, I know there's opportunities, and this is why I've got you guys here, because I want to talk about those opportunities that we have to help get our babies to sleep better, perhaps, and get ourselves to sleep better as well. So, if we wanted to perhaps move to the slides that you had prepared, we may be able to do that. But whilst we're getting that ready, I may just go to one of the audience questions that we have. Jody asked us, when can I get my baby on a routine?
Yep. So, Mikhail, I can answer that one if you like. So, in terms of when you can start to get your baby into a routine, that's essentially from day one. And a lot of parents will do this. It starts with obviously by themselves. As they do get older, then you can start to get them moving about in whatever ways. But even just the stimulation, playing with them and activity and so forth, that's a way that they can start to have these sort of social cues, getting dressed, having baths. If these are done at the same sort of time, that's helping them get into a routine and starting to basically inform what we call their body clock or circadian rhythm, when to be awake and when to be asleep. I don't know if you want to, sorry.
Yeah, I think we're trying to get the slide up. But do you think it's even more important right now to be thinking about that, routine for babies?
Did you want to answer this one, Mikhail?
Sure. I think it's always important to try and get a routine, but this is a time in which a lot of our routines have just gone, crazy and messed up. And it's maybe harder to try and maintain some kind of a rhythm when we don't have these external cues like going to work at a certain time or taking the older kids to school at a certain time that usually help us to maintain a pretty regular schedule. So what we have to do now is maybe try to create these cues for ourselves that will help us get, as Michael said, light at a certain time each morning, dim light in the evening, just so that our body clocks don't get shifted into all kinds of strange directions where we become, cave people that don't go outside, and our body clocks just don't align with the rhythm of day and night that helps us regulate our activity and eventually our health.
So could you talk a little bit more about the development of that body clock or that circadian rhythm, Michael? We can't get the slide up, unfortunately, but I know that you'll be able to talk without the slide.
I'll do my best. In fact, if I've got a camera here, why don't I just sort of draw it? This is where good old pen and paper can help us out. So what I'm going to talk about is called the circadian rhythm or the body clock. And now we were really passionate about trying to inform the Nanit customers about the biological contributors to sleep and infant sleep, because this is often missed when experts are talking about baby sleep. So we're going to talk about two different types of biological processes. The first one we're going to talk about is the body clock. So people have heard about the body clock. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that the body clock, as we see it in adults, and I've just got a little bit of a drawing here that I'll try to take you through. So on the y-axis here, this is where you've got alertness. So it's higher alertness here, lower alertness, in fact, sleepiness here. And this is really the sort of time and day of night. So if you can see here, we've got a curve that basically goes up, meaning increased alertness. And then here we have a little bit of a dip that usually happens in the afternoon when people feel like having a little nap. And then we have an increased alertness, and this peak happens around about dinner time. After this, we start to feel naturally sleepy, and then we fall asleep. And so this really low part here is when we're most sleepy, and that's because the circadian rhythm is also at its lowest. Eventually, it'll start to come up, and we start to feel more alert. So with an infant, unfortunately, when they're born, they don't come out with a circadian rhythm necessarily. It's not formed. And it usually will take most infants to develop this circadian rhythm by 6 months of age. Some lucky families will have their infant circadian rhythm developed by 3 months of age. So that's really important to know that it takes a while, but there's also individual differences. And as much as it is at the 6 month mark, that's where you'll see the circadian rhythm starts to develop. There's some things that families can do to try to help develop that circadian rhythm a bit quicker. I don't know if you want me to sort of explain them now.
Yeah. So, but when you're talking about circadian rhythm like that, so do you mean that it's really going to be about 6 months until people can really expect that their babies will sleep through the night? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'll talk later also about the other biological contributor to sleep as well. And it's just fascinating that the circadian rhythm, for the most part, for most babies, will develop by 6 months of age. It also so happens that the other biological contributor to sleep seems to develop by 6 months of age as well. But like we're mentioning, it doesn't necessarily mean that your baby is going to be sleeping badly until 6 months of age. It could be one of these babies that starts to develop those processes a bit earlier. Mm-hmm. And there are some other things that parents can do to try to help their baby sleep better too.
Okay, which we can get to. Okay, so do you want to talk about the? Do we want to? What I would love to thinking about circadian rhythm. What does that mean for families, really, like practically, in that first 3 months when there's little chance that their baby has a circadian rhythm? What does that mean for families, or what does that look like?
Exactly. I think we're sort of alluding to this, especially in this environment when you've got the COVID situation here, where a lot of people, like what Mikhail was saying, they've really lost that structure. And you find when people have lost that structure, that's when their circadian rhythms aren't really performing that well. To take an example, and I think Mikhail described it beautifully, that we're turning into cave people. And prior to the COVID situation, we would have, for instance, teenagers that got to a point where they were not coming out of their room and they were sleeping quite badly. In fact, their sleep is essentially, their circadian rhythm just keeps moving. It's almost like they're going around the world. It's not staying fixed. So they're sleeping at all times of the day and night. So that's what happens at the most extreme point when you take away complete structure and some of those cues. So in terms of practically, I think Mikhail was really speaking to this, is that it's almost like you still need to set your alarm. You need to have that regular time that you're going to be waking up. You need to follow that same sort of routine that you would if you were going to work. This is for yourself, and obviously this is something that you implement for your baby. So the differences are you're probably not getting outside. Try to get as much light as you can, whether it's by a window, whether you can go outside for a little bit, even if it's 5, 10, 20 minutes. but even having the lights on as bright as you can in the morning, because the body clock responds the greatest to bright light in the morning and then darkness in the evening. So those are two crucial things that they can do.
So you're saying that getting some sunlight in the morning is going to help set that body clock or help maintain the body clock that we've had, pre-COVID.
Certainly, and if you think about it, the lighting in your room, it looks bright, but if you go outside, even on a cloudy day, you're talking about thousands times more brightness outside, even if it's a cloudy day. You definitely don't look at the sun, anything like that. Just the reflection off of the concrete and all those sorts of things, that'll be enough brightness out there. But that's really a potent thing.
And so to that point, though, how long would you recommend that someone be outside or be close to the window even, perhaps?
Well, when we do treatments that require, say, for instance, in this case, teenagers, where they've got to reset their body clock because they're prone to fall asleep late and also wake up late, we suggest to them to have a minimum of 30 minutes of bright light in the morning. So this is what families can do as well. Even if they can sort of get their infant outside in a pram or something like that, 15, 20, 30 minutes, same time each day would be fantastic.
Great. That's a great, very, very practical tip. So now, do you want to talk a little bit about the other process that you were alluding to earlier?
Yep. So there's sort of no mystery to this one, although it's not necessarily talked about so much, but it's called sleep pressure. Mm-hmm. And sleep pressure is something that a lot of us have experienced. So if you stayed up really, really late, you feel really, really sleepy, like you find it hard to keep your eyes open, you just want to lie down. So this is a natural sort of process. So what happens is, as soon as you wake up in the morning, you start to build up sleep pressure. And if you were to, say, take an hour nap, you release a bit of that sleep pressure, and then you have to try to build it up again. And then finally, you'll get to a point where you call what's called saturating. You can't really get much more sleep pressure build up. You're really feeling like you need to fall asleep. Mm-hmm. And at that point, when you go to sleep and you start to have some of the deep sleep that happens at the start of the night, that's when you'll start to really release that sleep pressure. So this is something, unfortunately, that babies don't have too much of when they are born. But the research shows that there is this incremental change in their ability to build up sleep pressure. And again, by 6 months of age, this is when babies have their sleep pressure fully developed, mm-hmm. which is a great thing because you can use certain techniques to sort of help the baby fall asleep better. By 4 months of age, you do see that the average ability for babies to build up sleep pressure gets to about, somewhere between 50 to 75%. And by 2 months of age, it's probably around a quarter. So you can see it's really starting to develop as the infants grow. But that's together, the sleep pressure and the circadian rhythm, those are the two most powerful things for us sleeping, whether you're an infant or an adult.
So if my baby's not sleeping through the night at 6 months, what are some things that I could do to help my baby sleep through the night?
Well, I'll probably hand over to Mika here because I've done a fair bit of the talking and she's very knowledgeable with her research and clinical work, so I'll hand over to her.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually, even before answering that question, I wanted to add something small. You asked before what happens for parents that have 3-month-old or 2 or 4-month-old babies. And they, as Michael said, these babies likely don't have a mature circadian rhythm or a mature body clock. So we know that human beings are born not like a lot of animals that, just get out of the womb, start walking and independently functioning. Human beings just are born not mature enough to do a lot of things. And just as we don't expect a 3-month-old baby to walk, it's very hard to expect a 3-month-old baby to sleep through the night. And I think it's really a source of so much stress for parents these days. There is a lot of research, but also a lot of talk about sleeping through the night and a lot of pressure on parents to have their babies sleep through the night as soon as possible. Even like an expectation you sometimes see on social media, these perfect babies that sleep through the night at 2 months of age or 4 months of age. But no, that's social media and it's not always reality. And yeah. For a lot of families, for the majority, what we know from research is that 6 months is about the time that infants start having a long consolidated sleep episode at night when it's dark. it doesn't happen, it's not like an 8 or 10 hour period for all babies. It really varies. But I think one of the first things that parents can do when they want to help their baby and themselves, going to your last question, is to really lower their expectations when they have very young infants. And you can still do a lot behaviorally, which we'll go into, but I think the first thing is really understand that babies are just not born with that ability to sleep like adults do. And you have to be really patient and really understand that it just takes time.
Yeah.
So,
and to that point, we've had a lot of questions come in about, very young infants who are not sleeping well. And so, we have parents saying, I'm trying everything and my baby's not sleeping. My baby will only sleep on me. How do I get my baby to stop sleeping on me? My baby's 3 weeks old and is only sleeping on me. So could you answer that? Is it okay for a baby to be sleeping in a parent's arms for those first weeks? Or, are there tips or ideas that you could, give people to help soothe their babies in those early weeks?
Sure. So the first answer is, of course, it's okay. And if it's safe, then it's always okay. And I think a lot of these things are up to parents to decide what works for them until what age. Obviously, you don't want to have a 3-year-old sleeping on your, wearing a 3-year-old to sleep every night. But for sure, the first weeks are difficult, and it's very understandable for parents to be just spending even entire nights with their babies on top of them, as long as, again, safety is maintained. And that, I think, is the first thing that each parent of a newborn has to be aware of and know. But there are things to do that can help, and I think one of the key words here is going gradually. And really teaching your baby to gradually become more independent and really learning how to self-soothe, to regulate that kind of sleepiness that Michael was referring to before, when sleep pressure is up, come down and fall asleep. And
so how does a parent know when the sleep pressure is up?
So I think Michael, do you want to? You
sure.
Let me know.
Sure. I think that's a good question, because you might have parents out there. This is the first time they've got an infant, or it might even be the second time. And even like for those parents that have now the second child, they might sort of think, well, this is what we did with the first child. It worked, or that's all we know. Let's just try the same sort of thing, and maybe it doesn't work. So one thing that parents can do is to be almost like, well, I guess myself and Mikhail are, and yourself, is to be analytical, be a bit of a scientist, experiment with your baby's bedtime. With doing that, you'll be able to find maybe the ideal bedtime for them. And I think what happens is that sometimes we know that a lot of people will try to get information about what to do to help their infant sleep from family members and people that they know, the internet and books. And say, for instance, there's some books that say put your baby to bed at 7 o'clock. Now, the intention of those books is to say, okay, if you do that on a regular basis, they're talking about routine.
Yeah.
But your infant might not necessarily have the circadian rhythm such that 7 o'clock is the time when the circadian rhythm's coming down. It might not necessarily be that the little bit of sleep pressure is built up enough that 7 o'clock is ideal for them. Mm-hmm. So I'd probably ask the Nanit customers out there just to sort of think about changing their baby's bedtime. And what you can do is you can change it by, say, 15 minutes at a time. If you've been putting them down at 7 o'clock and, they just start to cry and so forth, for a week, just try 7:15, see what happens. See if that's a bit better. If it's not too much better, try 7:30, believe it or not. Just make these incremental sort of changes and see what the response is.
So you're saying incrementally later rather than incrementally earlier?
Yeah, I know parents would love to have their infant go to bed earlier so they can have more time, but it is counterintuitive. And this is also what we see with people with insomnia. They think, in order to get sleep, I've got to go to bed as early as possible so I can have the greatest opportunity to try to get sleep. And believe it or not, it's the opposite. Like, they go to bed earlier, and they're just awake more in bed. And this is what can happen for your infant. So you've got to just at least try to start to play around with what time that your infant would go to bed. But when you're doing that, try to have a very consistent time that they're at least getting up out of bed, or you're starting to show bright light and so forth. Try to have that almost like a brick wall, that doesn't move, but the other thing is moving.
So when you're talking about thinking about that, pushing their bedtime a little bit later to increase the sleep pressure, are you talking about doing that sort of temporarily whilst they're learning how to sleep, and then move their bedtime back to where it was before, or you're saying that they should permanently have this later bedtime?
Well, it depends what you define as permanently later bedtime. So say, for instance, we're using an example again, that it's 7 o'clock that they've been going to bed, and they temporarily try for a week, 7:15, and that got a little bit better. Okay, we'll try 7:30, see how that goes. And it's like, oh, okay, that's pretty good, but, we still want to see if it could be better than that, maybe 7:45, and then they sort of find 7:45 is great. This is fantastic. That seems to be their bedtime. It's easier to put down, so to speak. But they might sort of find that after a month or so, that the baby's struggling to stay awake until 7:45, more often than not. And if that's happening, then the idea is, yes, then bring it back by 15 minutes. Try 7:30 for a while and see how that goes. Mm-hmm. So it's just really what we would call calibration, just really trying to find out where is the ideal bedtime for this particular child.
Okay.
And I think to add to that, if I can, I think it's really important to remember that the first year of a human being's life is a year of just unbelievably dramatic changes in so many, aspects, but particularly in sleep. So newborns sleep for about 80% of the day. Of the 20, they could sleep for up to 17 hours per day.
Why does it feel like that though, Michelle?
It doesn't, because it is so fragmented, because their circadian rhythms and body clocks are not mature yet. Then they sleep for really brief episodes. So for parents, it's like you're constantly trying to help your child fall asleep, but they are sleeping a fair bit throughout the day. Whereas you fast forward a few months, only 3-4 months later, and they're sleeping only 50% of the 24 hours a day. So that calibration, that kind of trial and error and fine tuning is happening for parents in a year which everything changes constantly. Yeah. So I think flexibility is so important. You can't really, even when you think you've found a sweet spot, or you've recognized or identified what the infant's bedtime, the ideal one should be, that might not be true for, as Michael was saying, just maybe even a month later. So you have to constantly be in this process of learning and trying to understand and following the child's development to help.
Get it all down, and then it changes. Like then they transition from 3 naps down to 2, or they drop the second nap, or whatever they're doing. Or you start whatever. But just to touch on a point that you mentioned, can you talk a little bit about that sleep fragmentation and comparing the difference between sort of total nighttime sleep and a fragmented sleep? Like, is it important to get a certain number of hours sleep, or it's in total, or is it more important that sleep is not interrupted? In terms of how it affects you as a parent, in terms of how I'm going to be feeling, is that more dependent on the total amount of time that I'm sleeping, or how fragmented my sleep is?
That's a great question. I'll try to answer, and maybe I'll pass it on to Michael, who has a lot of knowledge about adult sleep. But you're actually asking about the parents, because we know the infants are going to have fragmented sleep, and the whole first year is about getting that sleep consolidated into one major sleep episode at night. For parents, there's actually not a lot of research about the effects of fragmented sleep, and that's really surprising, because so many parents just experience that for years and years. The first child and the second child, and there are also shift workers and a lot of populations that have fragmented sleep, but we don't know enough about its effects. I can tell you about one study that we did where we compared 4 hours of consecutive sleep for adults to 8 hours of fragmented sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So with 4 breaks in between. These were childless adults, so it didn't have anything to do with having kids, but we did wake them up and had them do something in the middle of the night, and we actually found no difference in their mood the next morning between these 2 conditions, and in their cognitive functioning and attention. So 4 hours alone of sleep were equivalent to 8 hours of fragmented sleep, which was shocking to us because, this is a reality, a pretty good reality for most parents. Like if you could get 8 hours, that's pretty good. And still it's like only 4. So I think we have to learn a lot more about the effects of sleep fragmentations on adults, but I'll let Michael, I don't know, Michael, are there any other effects that you know about or studies?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. When you look at the research studies in terms of fragmentation, the one that comes up the most is sleep apnea. So this is people that are sleeping for that long period of time, but the thing is that their airways become restricted because they're so relaxed, and then they're having issues trying to get oxygen, and the brain says, hey, this is bad, wake up. And they are constantly sort of waking up, even if they're not fully waking up. And if you look at the daytime consequences for these guys, it's often daytime sleepiness. And, just to use one example, very important profession, truck drivers often will be someone that has daytime sleepiness because of sleep apnea. And they're driving these large vehicles and you don't want them to fall asleep at the wheel. And that really then lends itself to this current situation because a lot of adults worry about the consequences of this broken sleep.
Yeah.
And I think this is the positive. There are positives about this COVID situation, and it's getting ignored far too much. But one positive is that not only are you having more interaction time with your family, and I think pets are coming up a fair bit as well, but there's less consequences on you as an adult if you are woken up during the night. You are not necessarily driving around or doing certain things. So I think people are a bit more compassionate. We are making mistakes, and that's absolutely fine. We're learning this new technology, we're adapting. So I think there's a good sort of message to sort of get from this fragmented sleep at this particular time. So if you had a baby now, believe it or not, it's maybe one of the best times to have had a baby.
Okay. I want to go back to a couple of audience questions because we have a lot to get through. I'm sorry. But I have a question here, and Michal, this is probably for you. Do you have any tips for transitioning from co-sleeping to transitioning to the crib?
Yes, definitely. So maybe I'll just start with saying, when you say co-sleeping, you mean room sharing?
No, I mean bed sharing. Sharing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So,
clarification. Yeah.
Yeah. So just so we make sure we say it, the recommendations are for room sharing until 6 months of age, and parents are asked to avoid bed sharing for safety reasons because of the risk of SIDS is significantly increased for co-sleeping. So I think it's an important question, and I hope some of these tips could be helpful. But I think going back to the idea of doing things gradually, and we talked about 2 processes that infants are not born with, the biological processes of sleep pressure and body clocks that aren't mature, but babies are born with a really important ability, and that is to learn. So they can learn, and that's what they do most of the day, right? They just learn so much about this world, and they can learn to sleep in their crib if we teach them and if we do it gradually. And what we can do is try to associate that crib, which is a safer place for them to be sleeping, with some positive experiences. So we can try and introduce the crib during the day when, they're happy and fed and relaxed. Maybe put them there for just a short while. Make sure it's comfortable, the temperature is right, and it's a good place for them to be. Have them there for a little while, and then take them back into our arms. Maybe we can even be, almost in the crib with them, like with our padding or with our hands, kind of making sure that the crib is associated with parental existence or presence, so that they learn that this is a place that we trust and we know that they can sleep there. And then the process is really doing that over and over again for gradually increasing intervals, so that the baby gets used to it and just learns that this is a place that they can be calm and rest, and it's associated with mom's smell and mom's or dad's, positive kind of voice, and just the whole experience of that as a good place, I think, will help them get accustomed to sleeping there gradually.
And transition to becoming independent sleepers.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions that I want to get to that are live. We have one from Rick. What tips do you have to help a 2-month-old take better naps? She sleeps well overnight but fights naps all day long. If we put her down, she will really only sleep for about 20 minutes.
Yep. So sounds like that sort of situation. Yeah, and probably even just infant and toddler. It's although they can't speak, when they do eventually speak, often particular willful children will say that sleep is boring. So if you see it from the kid's point of view, they don't want to miss out on stuff. So in doing so, maybe in the lead up to trying to get the nap, make sure that everything is boring around them, even what's going on in terms of the adult world. Again, taking into that account with sleep pressure, there's probably a little bit of sleep pressure that's already happening. And like what we said with the bedtime, trying to experiment with that, this is an ideal time to also experiment with the timing of the naps and trying to get those sort of regular. So say, for instance, if you're thinking that you need to put them down and that they need to be asleep by 10 a.m. in the morning for their first nap and they're struggling against it, it might be because they're actually not sleepy enough yet. Yeah. So maybe even try 10:15, 10:30 or something like that. And this is like I said, a great time to try to learn when they not only sleep at night but also during the day.
So you're saying that it's a good time for some science experiments at home with your babies, Michael?
Well, that's what we do. We're not sort of making this stuff up or I swore then. We do the science, and this is the thing. Myself and Michaela are psychologists, and as psychologists, you know your science, and then you apply that science to practice. You know what works. And I think also, like what Michaela was saying in terms of her tips last time, this is a time to try to gradually do something. A lot of parents don't like to sort of do that. They're very resistant because they're worried about the effects on the child, but also the effects on them. But if you're not out there driving, if you don't have to perform 100% at work, this is a great time to try these sort of tips.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I have another question, audience question that I would like to get to. This is from Eric. I have a newborn that's 2 months old. He was premature, and he was born 8 weeks premature. He's been having difficulty sleeping at night until it gets close to midnight. However, he sleeps a lot during the day. Any tips?
We look like we're who's going to take this one?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, there we go. Well, I think the first thing is that it's very hard for those sort of specific cases that we don't know the full history. And I think the first thing is to make sure that a pediatrician has done a full medical checkup to see if there is anything that is particular or unusual for this child who's born premature. Once everything has been cleared, that's when really psychology comes in and says, okay, what can we try to do here? Sorry, how old was that child now currently?
2.5 months.
2.5 months. Yeah, so it could be a bit of an unusual situation if they're sleeping more during the day as opposed to the nighttime. Mm-hmm. Remember that the circadian rhythm isn't fully developed yet. So, one thought that's going through my head is their circadian rhythm almost like flipped over at this point. In which case, if it is, they have to try to keep this child awake and stimulated as much as possible, and try to change that day by day, make it later and later. So they're trying to sort of change their sort of nighttime sort of sleep in their biological rhythm, which is occurring during the day, and try to sort of shift it so it's going to be that they're falling asleep at night. So that's a very tricky and tailored thing. So I guess what we're trying to suggest here is that first see a medical doctor, whether it's a pediatrician or the family doctor, and if the issue is still occurring for them, the idea would be to try to see a sleep specialist as well. There are particular websites that you can look up, certain phrases that you can Google, such as behavioral sleep medicine, and also look at the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. They might have some search engines where you can look to see if there's a sleep specialist area, normally affiliated with hospitals, where they'll have a combination of doctors and psychologists that can help and specialise with sleep.
And maybe I'll just add something small, because this is actually a finding that we saw in a recent study that we did with Nanit, which I think maybe is a good opportunity to thank all of those Nanit users that have participated in our studies. That's super helpful and really helps us understand so much more about infant sleep and, advanced science in this really important topic. So thanks. And I'll just share something that really relates to what Michael was saying and to this question. And that is that we see that there's a trade-off almost between daytime sleep and nighttime sleep, where infants, as the infant in Eric's question, that sleep for longer periods throughout the day and that have many, many naps, have more fragmented sleep at night too, and sleep less during the night. So, when you're for newborns and infants, sleep is, as we said before, it's fragmented, and there are several episodes throughout the day and night. So if we have more daytime sleep, we usually will see less nighttime sleep, and we'll see less consolidated nighttime sleep. So there's definitely this trade-off, which I'm not sure, because this is a premature infant and very young one, I'm not sure if it's a good idea to try and intervene with that just yet. But if we were talking about an older infant, then that definitely is indication to try and see if you can maybe reduce daytime sleep, and maybe even move from 2 naps to 1 nap sometimes when they're getting closer to 12 months of age, to see if we can lower daytime sleep to get more consolidated and more nighttime sleep.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Michal, speaking of research, you just mentioned our research together. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and about the study that we have just recently started?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we are so excited about that too. I think that this is Nanit gives us such an amazing tool to really study infant sleep, both objectively, which is very, very important and very rare. We do have some other measures like actigraphy and polysomnography to measure infant sleep, but Nanit's auto video somnography, so that monitor that translates into the sleep metrics that you guys are seeing on your apps, just gives us researchers the chance to really get such rich data about how infants are sleeping, and really use that data to find out things that we could not investigate before on such a large scale. And one of the things that we're interested in now, given this just I don't know how to call it, just crazy pandemic and that's flipped our lives and changed our lives so dramatically, is to see how these changes are affecting infant sleep and their parents' sleep. And we want to see, because the change is so big, routines are changing and stress levels are definitely increasing for a lot of people, both because of financial concerns and health concerns. But still, on the other side of things, they have a chance to maybe be at home with their children and maybe try to practice better sleep hygiene, better sleep routines. So we really want to understand what this thing is doing to your infant sleep, and to all of us, our sleep during this time. And we hope we'll have some results to share with you soon.
We will. We will. Okay, so we've got a lot of other questions that I would love to get to. So this is a classic one. How do I survive the 4-month sleep regression? Who wants to take that one?
Well,
we wanted to dispel any myths before we talk about it?
I mean, we've already talked about, and you're going to get regressions. This is going to happen at certain points, but not necessarily to everyone. And I think the key thing is to try to stick to the plan, stick to the routines that you have been doing. Sometimes what we'll do is that's, oh no, suddenly this is not working. What else can we try? When things you have been trying are actually quite effective. And by sticking to it, the regression adapts to back to the routine. So that's my best suggestion for that, is to have some solace, especially the fact that everyone has survived this. It's all quite fine, but stick to a good routine, understand about the biological processes, and basically power through.
Okay, great. Michal, do you want to add anything?
I totally agree. I think that maybe some things happen. Things happen all the time with babies. Teeth are growing. They learn how to roll, and that changes the way that they sleep because they move around more. So many milestones, are achieved, and sleep is so intimately tied with our development and our health that it's sensitive to all of these kinds of changes, and it reacts. We see reactions in sleep. So I agree with Michael. You have to try and keep your routines. Don't forget your knowledge. Don't get too stressed about it. Try to be compassionate and forgiving to your baby, and see if you wait a week or two, things might get back to normal, even better than what they were before the regression. And maybe this is also a time to say that parents, especially when we talk about parents of infants that are older than 4 months or 6 months, or can try to gradually help their children grow and become more independent by trying to see if their kids can do by themselves what they as parents have been doing for their kids. So I think
tell me, why is independence important?
Good question. Trying to think how I would answer that. I mean, sure, all of us would love to have our moms make our breakfasts and put us to sleep. My 8-year-old daughter would love for me to carry her and not have to walk places sometimes, but that's just not the way life is. And I think there's a lot of advantages to growing up and becoming more independent. And sometimes it's hard for parents to see that, but I think that's our job as parents, is to actually help our kids grow. Even if it's sad sometimes that our role in their lives gets smaller when they grow, and it's something that you have to kind of grieve in a way. But I think it's really, really the essence of what being a parent is all about. Helping them grow and become more independent. That's what we have to try and do in an age appropriate way. But we can't be there and do everything for them forever.
Yeah. Yes. And I always like to talk about, that, giving babies an appropriate amount of independence, or children an appropriate amount of independence. And so for my 10-year-old, it's not appropriate to ask him to drive to the store to buy some milk, but it is appropriate to ask him to go to put the laundry on, or go downstairs and buy me milk without having to cross the road. And similarly, it's not appropriate to expect a 6-week-old baby to be able to sleep a long stretch, but it is appropriate to be able to expect your 12-month-old to self-soothe at the beginning of the night, get themselves to sleep, and perhaps sleep all the way through the night. So, it's all about thinking about that, appropriate level of independence for your child.
100%, yeah.
So I've got a couple of other questions that I really would like to get to, if that's okay. So I've got one that I think I would like you to, it's a good one to answer, Michal. When should I stop waking my baby for night feedings and let her lead when she wants it?
Hmm. And we don't know the age.
Don't know the age.
I think if this parent is asking that question, then maybe this is a time to try.
Mm-hmm.
At least experiment with that. As Michael was saying before, parents have to be scientists in a way and try and see what happens when they try. And I think that, a lot of parents continue way after they I don't know if should be, but they don't have to keep waking their kids up. Sleep could definitely continue without that awakening, especially if the child is in the appropriate weight range. Then definitely, I would say, give it a try tonight.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We've got a couple of other questions. Oh, I'm trying to think of things that are the best ones to ask. Okay. Any tips for getting twins onto the same schedule?
Twins are always incredibly, yes, they're very difficult situation, regardless if it's like 5 months or 5 years of age. I can only hope that this person has the supports in place. I don't know if we're talking about identical twins and how close their sleep timing might be as well. I think we're just sticking back to that whole...
Is that different for fraternal and identical twins?
I'm actually unclear about that, how precise their sleep timing might be, because especially in this situation, you've got very closely shared genes and the environment is very similar at the point in time. I can only say, think about the tips that we mentioned before about experimenting with bedtime. Yep. See if it is the same bedtime for both twins, or if they have to have slightly different bedtimes. I'm unclear about this person's sleeping situation, if it's if they're room sharing or if they've got their infants in their own bedroom. But it's a case of just trying to at least about the biology, have a bit of an experiment at least initially with their bedtimes.
Okay, all right. Now the results of our poll are in. So the question we asked was, has COVID-19 affected your family's sleep? We have 35% of people said yes, 31% of people said no, and 33% said no change. So that is interesting for us. But we will have a lot more information for everyone about how this COVID-19 situation has affected their sleep and their mood, and their children's sleep in the weeks and months to come. Are there any? We're getting close to finishing up, so I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you guys would like to add, or any sort of takeaways that you want to give people in this incredibly trying time, and maybe a couple of top tips for parents and babies.
I might sort of suggest that I think Mikhail has said it a couple of times, that it's definitely highly important that parents do Google safe sleeping practices, and to know what the current sleep practices are, because often a lot of parents will worry about the type of parenting that they're doing and is that going to harm their infant, but this is really an area that they have to look at. And I guess the other thing is that I think we're trying to push that point of parents being a sleep scientist, for their own child and for themselves. Yeah. I hope they can start to have a critical view of the information that's coming to them, whether it's about COVID, whether it's about sleep, and they can try to get to what, like we try to do, the primary source, like where is this information coming from? We will often in clinic say to parents, there's this thing called Google Scholar, for instance. You can actually search research papers on that. It's available to the public. You can type the word infant sleep in there and you can find out and read the studies for yourself. That's actually where you can learn. And especially if you type in the word review, like infant sleep and review, then you can actually learn about some of the stuff. So broadly speaking, hopefully they can start to change the way that they think and approach about this, rather than think about the sort of only about the collection of tips. that they can try. So I don't know if, Michaela, you got anything to add?
I agree. I totally agree. I think maybe the only thing to add is that, you know, the reason that it's so important to be a scientist is that every infant is so different, and there aren't any right answers. There aren't any, you know, absolute truths. Even science, you know, it has its limitations, and it's really important to maintain that kind of, you know, try to be knowledgeable, but also flexible. Keep your eyes open, your ears open. Try to maintain that, you know, it's really important to keep the routines, but you can't be too strict and rigid about them. Parenting is so much about that kind of, it's almost like a paradox where you have to be really firm but kind, really, you know, keep routines but be flexible. It's a hard job, but if you try to do it and try to, you know, be as positive as you can, and as compassionate and forgiving as you can, look for support in that. You know, I think that if you can work together as a team, if you have two parents, then that's super important. You really have to double up on your support for each other at this time, and always work as a team, and you know, get through it. Kids grow up really quick. So try to maybe even enjoy it. You can.
And we're sort of all past the infant stage, but you know, and everyone told us that it would all go very, very fast, and we didn't believe them, but it really does. It really does. So, well, guys, thank you so much. We're just so grateful that you could join us and share your wealth of knowledge, and we're just very, very grateful, and thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. We hope to have a similar format to this sometime, you know, again in the year with you guys, and perhaps a webinar as well, you know, in the next couple of months as well. So we're super excited about working together and the research that we've been doing together, and just so grateful that you could share your time and your knowledge with everyone. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys, and be well.
Bye.